Aviation requires endurance. Whether you're flying long trips, getting a new type rating, or fitting flying into your career and family life, you know all about being persistent. Today, we're exploring how to level up your endurance without burnout.
And I'll share my recent story about an around the world trip that I had and some lessons that I learned about how to get out of your comfort zone, maximize rest on board long flights, and how we managed crew resources to stay sharp during the flight.
I'll share the 6 key habits that high performers use to build endurance. These will increase your endurance without requiring you to add more pushing or stress into your already full life. You can start using these time-tested habits today.
The Calm Cockpit podcast starts now.
Onyx 1-2 Mike Oscar, runway 27, clear for takeoff.
Welcome, everyone, to today's episode. I'm Gita Brown, midlife student pilot and licensed yoga and meditation educator with over 30 years of experience teaching high performers how to improve their lives without adding stress.
And I'm John Niehaus, corporate pilot and longtime professional flight instructor. You might remember me as the former program director of the National Association of Flight Instructors and the More Right Rudder podcast.
Woohoo! Which is how I met John and why we are here today. Yay for NAFI.
Yay.
So before we dive into the story of your around the world trip, John, I just wanted to say a very quick thank you for all of the positive support we've received around our show. We dropped a little teaser episode in December of 2024, and we're hoping it might make a little tiny ripple of goodness in the field of aviation, but we really weren't prepared for the rush of support. And yes, let's talk about this topic responses that we've received. So thank you.
Yeah, it's very humbling that our little idea for this podcast has turned into something. We weren't quite sure what it was going to be, but it's turned into something, and hopefully it'll turn into something more. So we appreciate being so well received.
Thank you so much, everybody. So on to serving you guys today. Today's topic, building endurance. And as I said in the show opener, if you're an aviator, you know all about persistence. I'm just in my private pilot training right now, and I'm learning all about persistence as I get used to handling my daily life of teaching and fitting flight training in around that. So we're all used to sacrificing mental or physical health in order to have career success. We're very familiar with that story, but we wanted to open up a discussion around the habits that build endurance without that need to sacrifice personal relationships, physical health, and especially mental well-being. So John, you recently flew around the world, which I think is so cool. And I would love just to chat about, as an aviator, but using it as sort of a way to build endurance. I figured it'd be really fun for people to hear a little bit about this trip. And I think you have some really cool takeaways. So let's start at the beginning though. Why'd you take the trip? Who'd you take it with? And please tell us a little bit about the cool airplane you fly too, because I fly a Piper Warrior and I'm happy when I do a cross country all on my own. I'll be happy when I do a cross country all on my own. So tell us a little bit about your airplane too, so we can enjoy doing it with you vicariously.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'll start by saying, I think part of what this whole podcast episode is going to be is learning from me all the things you're probably not supposed to do. And then learning from you all the ways that I could have done it better. Because truthfully, and we'll get into these details later, but I just kind of am guilty of going out and doing it and not always preparing so much from a personal, mental, physical well-being standpoint. You just go and hope for the best. We prepare all of this for the flight. We know every last detail down to, the I's and the T's. But when it comes to kind of making sure that we are personally ready, sometimes that's a whole different story. As far as my job and the airplane, I do certainly have to keep some of the details a little bit confidential just because of the nature of being a corporate pilot. However, I do fly a super awesome airplane. And I don't want to be one of those guys that, I fly a Gulfstream, because I know there's a lot of people that do that. So I will do it just once and say I fly a Gulfstream 600 for a Fortune 500 company. It is one of the coolest airplanes I've ever flown. It has the longest range out of any of the airplanes that I've flown. It's my fourth type rating, and I hope to be flying it for a long time. As far as the flight itself, we hit 3 continents, including North America, of course, and it was basically head east and keep going. And we hit 4 different destinations, and each one was in a different country. So certainly there's business to be done around the world, and the life of a corporate pilot is to make sure that business gets done safely, effectively, and quickly. So we're a mobile office, and we make sure that our executives have the ability to continue their work even while they're en route to wherever it is that they're going. So for us, it's a lot of fun. Our department hadn't done a trip like this in several years, so we'd been preparing for this, like I said before, for months. I think it took us about 4 months to really get everything dialed in and ready to go. We had a couple hiccups along the way. Over in the Middle East area, there's all kinds of GPS jamming and things, so we were ready for that. But you just hope that when you take off, you've prepared yourself as best as you can.
Wow. I mean, I know you're a little reticent to, you were not humble bragging about your plane, but I think you're a little reticent to talk about it, but I'm so glad that you did, because it is worthy of celebrating that you have done all of this training to get you to the point to where you can do an around the world trip in a big fancy jet like the one you fly. I think it's super cool and worthy of celebrating.
It is.
So
cool.
Yeah. And you and I have talked a lot about this with like building endurance, because I think the first time you and I ever spoke on the phone was either the day I soloed or maybe the day after I soloed. And you told me something very important, which I will remember forever, which is that these milestones tend to move by very quickly, particularly when you're on a career track like you are. I'm flying for fun, for enjoyment, for self-enrichment. But if you're doing it as a career track, it's like once you solo, then there's the next brass ring and the next one and the next one and the next one. And you told me to actually take a moment and enjoy what you're doing and enjoy the fact that you soloed an airplane, because it's something that only a minuscule amount of the population has done, and to basically take time to smell the roses and enjoy that achievement. I think that's really good advice. So it's coming back to you right now. I can say, take time to savor that you took off east and you went all the way until you got back to where you started again, which is a pretty big achievement. So it takes some time to like integrate that win. Have you taken any time to integrate the win since you got home and kind of like have that as part of now your persona?
It's funny. It's like anything that is challenging. When you come in and you have high crosswinds and you nail the landing, or you come back from that first cross country flight that you were completely unsure of and figured you were going to get lost. You finally get done and you feel like you just wrestled a bear to the ground. So there is sort of that after trip high that you get. And it just kind of makes me think about what the next one's going to be, because I'm hoping there will be more, and another one and another one after that. As far as the advice is concerned, that's another one of those sort of do as I say, not as I do, because I 100% was the victim of waking up one day as a commercial pilot and going, that was a lot of training, and I didn't really enjoy any of it. And that's not to say I didn't enjoy the training, but I didn't take the time to, exactly like you said, enjoy the wins. You just get locked into keep going. And cat's in the cradle. Next thing you know, it's all over. And how did I get here? So
I think this is you're hitting on something really important. I was talking with a former student of mine who is now professional musician in his own right. So he's a teacher, a performer, and then we're musicians. So he also sells equipment. He does whatever he needs to do in the music field. But he said, okay, so now I'm the teacher, Gita, and I'm teaching these young students to prepare, train, get ready for the audition or get ready for the performance. And we train and train and train and train. It's intense every day. And then before they go on stage, we slap them on the back and we go, just have fun, enjoy it. He's like, but we haven't trained anyone along the way how to let go when you're on stage and let the music flow through you. We haven't trained them how to enjoy being on stage. We actually haven't trained in an inherent stopping and really to smell the roses so that we can do something which a great personal growth coach of mine I work with called integrating the wins, where you have a big win like the first solo or the first cross country, or in your case, your first around the world flight in a fancy plane. If we don't take time to integrate the wins, we're missing some of the opportunity to build that neurological framework in our brain for pairing that experience with enjoyment and internal satisfaction. And instead, we're focusing it outward so that the only thing that will make us satisfied is the next thing that's coming along. Mm-hmm. And then we push for that and we get it, but then we're still dissatisfied. It's the difference of having an internal sense of control versus an external sense of control. So I think it's one thing that my yoga training did very well. The initial training that I did, formal training, I was training for decades before I did formal training, but my first formal teacher training, every week they would stop and have a party for no reason. And it seemed like kind of goofy, that it would be something simple. Like we'd all just go get our food and have our food together in the break room, but there would be streamers and cake and just music. And there'd just be some reason to just get together and celebrate. And I realized at the end of that month-long training, which was intense in its own right, that I actually felt more at ease and more in charge of the information that I learned, because baked into it was this sense of, this is inherently valuable and enough already. Mm-hmm. I don't have to get something more to feel okay. And I think it led me to be a more effective yoga teacher, because then I wasn't looking for something from my students to make me feel better. I was just showing up already present and full. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do we build this into things like aviation? We can't build it necessarily into type rating, right? You have to learn how to fly the plane. So we have to build it in for ourselves, which is some of what I'll talk about later. I don't know. Does that resonate with you at all or make sense?
I mean, it makes perfect sense. It kind of reminds me of my son was in swimming lessons, and they have different levels that they have to achieve. And every time they finally get from one level to the next, there's a big sort of nautical bell that they go and they ring this bell and everybody. Yes. So, I mean, it's the same kind of thing. We have a little bit of that in aviation, because certainly when you pass a check ride, there's the dopamine rush that comes with that. And that is hard to beat. And then, of course, with a first solo, if you've got a good instructor, we'll make sure that is properly rewarded, whether that's the cutting of a shirt or a challenge coin or whatever that might look like. But I think the where we are guilty, especially as career aviators, is, just pushing too fast past it. And, it's just like going to school. You finish a semester, you finish a grade, you finish a degree, and it's already in the back of your mind. As Americans, it's like, okay, I got this degree. Now what am I going to do? Where's my next job? How am I going to utilize this? So I think it's boiled down to something as simple as just slow down. And it's easy to say. And after the fact, as a teacher, I can try to program that into somebody else. But when you're in the moment, it's very difficult to make sure that that's something that you are cognizant of.
Yeah. And I think too, it's sort of like we have like a happiness culture in this country as well, potentially, where we're saying, oh, you had a good win, you had a successful thing, so be happy and be grateful for it, and you should feel these things. And so I want to be clear that I'm not saying like, John, you should feel so happy and satisfied because you did that. Like you have to feel a certain way. It's more taking a moment to acknowledge and
Mhm.
say, I did this thing. Therefore, I feel proud. I feel accomplished. I feel grateful, whatever it is. Acknowledge those feelings, potentially share it with another person, and integrating the good and the bad of the experience into sort of your being and your mind so that it becomes part of you. And again, so that it's not that it's, again, focused outward, but that you're focusing the lessons learned inward for you as a person, less on I passed or didn't pass the check ride as a measure of my self-worth. So it's not that you have to feel happy about it. I don't want to be that person. Be happy. It's just feel all the feelings and acknowledge them. So one of the things you told me about this trip was like that it was a big getting out of your comfort zone. So this is where I'm at with my comfort zone, fellow aviators. I just flew to a new airport a few weeks ago, and it was like the first time all on my own, no instructor in the plane. And of course, we picked a day where it was supposed to be quiet in the pattern over there, and it was not quiet. There were two helicopters doing whatever they were doing because they're going all different. There was two planes in the pattern and three of us coming into this non-towered airport all at the same time. So to me, that was outside of my comfort zone. Managing traffic at a non-towered airport is challenging. I can handle it now. I feel good in my abilities, but it still is out of my comfort zone. There's a lot going on. Guarantee you, I pulled that blah, blah, blah traffic. This is Warrior 32659 student solo. And then I gave the rest of my call, and everyone, they gave me a lot of room after that. They were so helpful, but that was out of my comfort zone. So John, this trip was out of your comfort zone, right? Like there was a lot that went into it.
Yeah, I mean it's brand new. I liken it to the idea that at this point in my career, this is the equivalent of what you just said. You know,
Yeah.
when you're brand new, going to an airport on the other side of the state is
Yeah.
a lot. It does take additional planning, additional effort, and there's stress associated with it. When you are a charter pilot, which is what I used to do, and I was primarily domestic, you expand that circle, and now it's not the same state, it's a state on the other side of the country, and you've probably never been to this airport before. Maybe you've never even heard of this airport before. So then all of a sudden you do that for a while, and that gets better, as anything does with practice. And now, you know, that ring is finally even bigger. So it's I'm not just going to an airport, say, on the other side of the country. I'm going to an airport on the other side of the world. And ultimately, a flight instructor would tell you at your level, an airport's an airport. As long as it's got a runway, your airplane's going to land the same, whether it's in California or Massachusetts. Same thing still goes. The airplane's going to fly and land the same in China as it does in the United States. So it's not about the airplane. It's about what you're doing to get the airplane to where you want to be. And so, you know, that circle then encompasses things like language barriers. Because yes, ICAO standards, everything's supposed to be English. Well, Italian English versus French English versus Chinese English, they're varying levels of English. And so sometimes that in itself is the most difficult part. Additionally, you have things like, okay, it's a 10-hour flight. So it's what a 2-hour flight in a Warrior, it could be the equivalent of a 10-hour flight in a Gulfstream or any other kind of jet. It's that sort of, like you said, endurance, the perseverance of getting from point A to point B and making sure you don't lose any details along the way, because it is such a long flight and you are fatigued. And again, that level of fatigue, it's the same as what anybody else would experience. It's just on a different level because you've trained yourself over the years to be used to 3, 4, 5-hour flights. And so bumping it up to 8 and 10, again, is the same equivalent of a private pilot who's maybe used to 20-minute flights going on a 3-hour flight. So it's just all upscaling. And the forever student sometimes forgets that they're a forever student. You get to a point where you're like, I can handle this. What else is there to do? And all of a sudden you go, I'm going to go to Brazil today. Oh, all right. Well, what does that mean? And so it's just doing all your research. It's preparing in the same way you would with anything else, but also remembering that there's different cultures, that there's different regulations, that there's the charts, while they look the same, aren't always the same. There's going to be different information, and how do you find it? So it's kind of that mental game of flying the airplane's the easy part. It's making sure that you as a person are ready both intellectually but also physically.
So you've been a career pilot for how long now? How many years? Maybe the clock starts ticking when you graduated from college, or were you already flying professionally?
Yeah, so I graduated in 2009, and that was when I earned my CFI certificate. So now back then, as I'm sure a lot of listeners will remember, 2009 was not a great time to get kicked out of school.
Right. Economic downturn.
Right. So when I graduated, there were no flight instructing jobs. So I had a flight instructor certificate, and all of the regional pilots were coming back because they were getting furloughed to flight instruct and take all those jobs. So I finished college with with very little prospects, and ended up in research for a little over a year, which was actually a really fun job to have, and topic for another discussion. But it took me about a year to get my first flight instructing job. So I would say arguably I've been professionally flying since 2010.
Okay, so about 15 years, if my math is accurate. So, and you're a career pilot, though. I mean, because you went to school for it, it was your goal for a long time. So I sort of also include that time in college. It's not like you were doing, a degree in something else entirely and then made a switch.
True.
So as this sort of, career pilot, and you've had definite 15 years of this experience now, that takes endurance just to make it through that 15 years. But what I've seen consistently in your career is that you're always stepping outside of your comfort zone. Like you had a succession of jobs that gave you challenges upon challenges upon challenges. And as soon as those got sort of a little too comfortable or not a great fit, you'd go look for the next challenge. When you left NAFI, you were like, I have this career, but I'd also like to do something else. So you start a podcast. So I see a theme here, and I see it in a lot of pilots. We're always have our head on a swivel. We're looking for stuff that gets us out of our comfort zone. So do you think that that's a natural thing of being a pilot, that we always look to expand the comfort zone? And how really does that help then to build that longevity of a career? Like, what does a career look like if you don't step out of your comfort zone, if you get comfortable in that left seat and you don't push that edge?
I think the old adage of being comfortable in being uncomfortable is something that truly does fit. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to pilots, but I do think that we are pre-programmed, because in a lot of cases we are kind of type A personalities where we're forced to be, whether you want to be or not, because that's just part of the PIC mindset. You have to be able to take command of a situation for the safety of yourself and others. And that translates into the rest of your life when you're looking at, okay, I have this thing, but I want it to be more, or I want to fly the next big thing. I started out in a Learjet and I want to fly a Falcon. That's a step up. So you're always kind of looking for that, for whatever that next edge is. And I think that the career in itself forces that, because we have so many quote unquote stepping stones. I am the first to tell people that I don't like the adage of flight instructing being a stepping stone, but let's face it, a lot of people start their careers that way because, well, there's not a whole lot of other ways to do it. So you start out as an instructor, and then maybe you go, if you are airline path, you go to a regional. Well, you can't stay at a regional for your whole career. I guess you could, but most people don't. And so you're always going, okay, this is a 3 to 5 year destination before I go to the next thing, And so, in my case, you just get used to that. And I think as far as the podcast is concerned, it just sort of shows that I don't sit still for very long. I get bored easy. Glutton for punishment. Any of those old adages.
I won't take that personally. I will not take that personally.
So it's you just, I think you have to be ready to take the step into sort of the unknown and figure out what that looks like for you?
I think that is so, okay, dare I say wise? I'm not calling you wise, but I'm saying that what you said is wise. No, seriously, because very often, so I'm an educator. I teach, yoga and music education. I've been doing that for decades. We can easily become these like fake experts because we train so long in yoga or music at what we do, and then we get to a certain level of being in a comfort zone, and then all we do is we sit in a room and we tell other people how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We stop sort of challenging ourselves to either get up on stage or take a different style of yoga or expand our meditation practice or do whatever it is for our own comfort zone. So it's just like becomes this sort of like script you're almost telling students, like, well, just let go. Well, just, push that button and breathe or whatever it is. And it just becomes like this false sense of wisdom or knowingness without really having any skin in the game. You're not asking yourself to put your butt on the line and actually do something hard yourself. Like one of the best ways that I think has really helped my teaching was learning how to fly. Because now I'm looking at a 7th grader who's terrified to go up on stage and perform. And I'm like, oh, I can identify with that because I'm flying in the pattern tomorrow. And my instructor told me he's going to be silent the whole time and not help me at all unless it's safe for a safety reason. And I'm like, now I understand what they're feeling. Whereas it was a really distant memory, a few years before that, because I'd just been doing it for so long. I'm so comfortable. So there seems to be this key secret sauce that I see in people like you who are, career achievers, but who haven't sacrificed all of their personal life, where they get out of their comfort zone often enough that they don't kind of become complacent in this sort of like, yeah, I know it all. I've got it all together. There's like a humbleness that comes with that. I don't know. Did this trip feel important to you? It seems important to me, or am I just projecting all over you?
It certainly is. I mean, it's definitely another feather in your cap. I thoroughly enjoyed it. You get so used to going to the same places over and over again that when you start to branch beyond the country, it's weird to say that like I've been all over the country. That old hat of going to Teterboro, going to Aspen. I mean, it's weird to say that is a common thing for what I used to do. And I actually have to leave the borders of the country to find something new. So that statement in and of itself just is a weird feeling, but it is cool. It is cool. And to your previous point, when it comes to the career progression and you mentioned the whole idea of sort of sacrificing personal well-being and all of that stuff, honestly, the entire progression of a pilot, and I'm willing to sort of make this a very generic statement for professional pilots, but the progression is the selfishness of trying to get that back because you start out and you give up everything. The idea of trying to get that mental well-being back is that progression of regional to major or charter to corporate, or whatever that looks like to you. That next job you are almost forced into because the different levels of being a pilot, especially early on, are so demanding that you have to find the next thing just to get a sliver of that personal well-being back.
Yeah.
So there is some selfishness in, I have to do this because if I don't, I can't withstand the current level of activity.
Yeah, no, it's amazing to me the parallels between this and being particularly a classical music performer. It's similar but different. Now, honestly, we go out on stage, we're going out on stage. We don't have 110 people sitting behind us or 5 people sitting behind us whose lives are literally in our hands. Like, I understand that metric is not equal. However, in order, like in terms of having the career that you want, it's the same thing. You first have to get the degree with the teacher who's going to help you get there. Then you have to do your regional auditions. You get into a regional orchestra. You pray to God they keep you after a year, because if they don't like you, they fire you and you have to go back through the audition process again. Then you get to a slightly bigger orchestra and a slightly bigger one. I mean, from the time I was 16 until I finally said enough and realized I was a teacher and settled down, I lived all over the country. I was moving all the time. The same type. My schedule was not my own. I had a student call me up after their training and they said, I feel like I'm dead inside. Right. And so it's and then we build our career to then we're like, okay, now I can have some breathing room. So I think that's why we wanted to have this conversation on endurance today, is to say, this external world is not going to change because Gita and John have a podcast. We're not going to change the field of aviation to have a different training scenarios or different jobs. Prioritize your self-care. If we don't start building that into our lives from the ground up from day one, it's not going to be there for you. And if you potentially wait till you get the dream job for that to happen, that's a long way down the road and a lot of years of sacrificed health that will show up in your elder years. So I was always that person in music school pushing against this paradigm. I was that weirdo in the wings, breathing and warming up and having all these classical musicians laugh at me, quite honestly, because I was doing self-care backstage. Because I was like, I don't want to feel like crap just because I'm performing Beethoven 17 times this week. And I'm so glad that I did, because now I can share it with aviators. Yay! That it doesn't actually have to be this way, even if the job demands a certain element of that. There's ways to move forward. So, but before I get into my habits, I do want to talk to you really specifically about the flight itself, because I think there is gold there for endurance. I'm picturing you flying around the world. You have 3 crew members. How in the world do you guys actually handle physical endurance, like with rest and staying mentally sharp to like nail that landing when it really matters after you've been flying? Like, how long were your legs? Were they 10 hours? Like, how do you do that? Talk to me.
Well, and
Tell me.
this is one of those cases of, again, the things you're not supposed to do. It's very difficult for me to prepare. I am not the type of person that can go, oh, I've got a really early morning tomorrow. I'm going to go to bed at 6. I just can't physically do it. My body knows that I normally go to bed sometime between 10 and midnight. And if I try to put my pillow or my head to the pillow at 8, then I stare at the wall and contemplate my existence for 2 hours before
Which is always a great recipe for deep sleep, is contemplate your existence in the dark. That always works.
It never goes well. So, again, it's you do your best in terms of preparing from a rest standpoint. Certainly you try to avoid your phone, you try to avoid any sort of stressful situations. And sometimes just the notion of being in a quiet place or doing something that you enjoy, whether it be reading or watching a show or whatever, that can be enough. Yeah. And that's about what I do. I try to get a little bit extra sleep if I can, but where I'm at in my life physically, I can't really do much of that.
You can't force yourself to sleep. Come on.
No, but that's part of where all of the catalyst to this podcast comes in, where it's like, maybe there are tricks of how to do this. How do I force myself, be the guinea pig here to learn these things and be better myself? So yeah, in our case, we had varying degrees of legs. I mean, it was anything from 8 hours to, I think we had maybe a 12-hour leg or something. 3 pilots, a flight attendant, and a flight tech. So crew of 5 total. And as far as the pilots are concerned, it's a matter of just continuously checking in and being honest and saying, I'm tired, or I need to get up and walk around. I need a break. And so obviously there's 2 of us flying at any given point. The third one is either in the jump seat, or we have a sort of crew rest bunk right behind us. And it'd be anything from, you'd get a 2-hour break. So you'd have the pilots that are flying, you're on a 4-hour shift, and then you get a 2-hour break. Sometimes that 2 hours, if you're truly being honest with your crew members, that 2 hours might need to be 3 if the other 2 are doing okay. It just depends on, again, what kind of rest you got the night before and how you're feeling in the moment. As far as how do you stay awake and all the rest of that stuff, lots of coffee and lots of Red Bull, which again, probably not the best idea.
Red
But
Bull
it does
gives
get it
you
done.
wings, though.
Yeah, it does get it done. And of course, the statistics show in any phase of flight in terms of whether you're in a small piston, a light twin, light jet, large jet, your most dangerous parts of the flights are always going to be takeoffs and landings. And so when you've been up all night and you've had a 10-hour leg, you've got to be on your game for that landing, because it does mean so much to the safety of the flight that last 20 minutes, that's where it's critical to know what you're doing, where you are, and be honest with yourself. I should not be the one that lands this, even if technically I'm pilot in command and I'm the one that's supposed to be flying that phase of flight. If I'm not okay, I have two other options behind me or next to me that I can say, look, can you do it? And it's no big deal. There's no, you have to be able to get over yourself and understand that it's not a competition. We're a team.
Did that come easily to you, saying things like that throughout your career? Is that something you've learned? Do you feel like that's like baked into training, or is it something more personal to you?
I'd say it's a little bit of both. I mean, again, another episode down the line, but I'm very cognizant of my own skills and the skills of the people that I work with. And if anything, I tend to underestimate myself. And so when I'm thinking about a flight, whether it be domestic, international, or anything in between, I'm always looking at the leg in terms of what the dangers are, and then comparing that to the skill level that I believe that I have versus somebody else. It doesn't really matter how good you think you are if you're going to get somewhere and end up as a smoking hole in the ground. So I'm a firm believer in whichever one of us has the largest percentage of success, that's who should be doing it at that moment, no matter what, no matter how we started off the flight. The end is who can do it best and who can do it safest.
So you're willing to like adjust that as the flight goes on too, and as fatigue levels might vary too, you might have to adjust, adapt, and modify your game
Absolutely.
plan.
And not always do we have that luxury.
Yeah.
But in this particular case with, the airplane and the crew members that we have, we do have that flexibility, and that's a really useful tool when you're trying to mitigate any kinds of safety issues.
All right. So come clean now. Tell us what you guys call your little sleep chamber back there. The people need to know. What do you call the little chamber that you all get to relax in?
No, I didn't come up with this term. However, I am very partial to it. When I got the initial tour of the airplane, it was introduced to me as the fart locker. And it's true.
What else could it be called? I mean, come on. When you release and you relax, the body does what it needs to do.
I mean, it's definitely comfortable. It can get a little hot in there, but it can be a little stagnant air in there. Let's just put it.
I can imagine. You stand at the door and like pump it back and forth a little bit to get some fresh air in there. So, okay, I'm picturing you've just come off, you've been flying, and then you go and you get in the fart locker. You're like, okay, I have 2 hours, ready, set, sleep. Like, that's not happening for anybody. I mean, you've just been up, not just like relaxing at home doing a jigsaw puzzle. You've been flying a multi-million-dollar aircraft. So like, what do you do when you get in there? Talk to us. Tell us, how do you manage that rest portion so that you have the endurance for the flight?
I mean, that's it. It kind of happens exactly how you just said. You get in there and you go,
ready, set, sleep, and then
yeah, I have 2 hours. We better do something. And again, it comes back to you close your eyes and contemplate your life story. And then you realize that a half hour has passed, and the more you try to force yourself to sleep, the worse it gets, because it's just like that early morning when your alarm's going to go off at 4 and it's already midnight, and you're like, I have to do this, but it just doesn't work. So in my case, I actually had a couple mitigation strategies that I learned a long time ago. some of it out of pure necessity, whether it be, you know, what we just talked about, or trying to figure out stress. But the two things that have really helped me are, it sounds kind of corny, but they call them sleep stories. It's like bedtime stories for adults. There's an app that I use, and they've got all of these stories. It's anything from just talking about cooking a food dish, to my wife loves one on the history of mathematics, which is super boring, to like Bob Ross episodes. So like it really does help with that sort of inner voice that distracts you and keeps you up. And all of a sudden you're listening to something somewhat calming, and next thing you know, you're asleep. So that definitely helps. The other thing that I have found works for me is I have another app that is binaural beats. And I don't know if it's real. I don't know if it's just placebo, you know, here, eat this Tic Tac and you'll fall asleep. But they have this setting for helping you get into deep sleep. And I think it's like theta waves or something. It's goes into your ears and you hear different things. If you can get yourself used to not being annoyed by the sound, it really just puts you to sleep. So in my case, I try to use a combination of the two of those. You can actually sort of overlap them, and that helps me. But even before that, it's just like you said, you're kind of hyped up. You probably already had 6 cups of coffee because you've been up for however long it's been. And we always leave in the evening. So you've had an entire day, and then your work day starts, and then you fly through the night. So it's not just, oh, I woke up in the morning and left. It's, I had a full day of taking care of a 5-year-old and preparing for a trip and doing all these things. So you get in the room, and you can't just, even if you tried all of these mitigation strategies, you're probably still wired. And again, do as I say, not as I do. But the first thing a millennial does is jumps on their phone and, you know, trolls Facebook for a while. And next thing you know, the blue light from your phone makes you even more wide awake, and you're going, shoot, this was a terrible idea.
Yes. The hour rabbit hole of social media. What happened? I fell in.
Right. And so now you may or may not have just burned an entire 2-hour break doing nothing but break instead of sleep.
Right.
And so it's a combination of all of those things. And in the back of your mind, you're just sitting there going, I have to do this for the safety of the flight. It is a personal responsibility to make sure that I'm using rest for rest in whatever form that looks like.
Yeah.
And so it can be quite challenging.
I love that, though, that last thing you said, two last things that you said. Number one is sort of like giving yourself permission to look like what it's going to look like, which I think a lot of us, when we think of self-care or doing things like maximizing rest, we start to think like, the shoulds come out. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. We put all this pressure around it instead of just saying, my rest is going to look what it's going to look like. A rest doesn't have to look like deep, relaxing sleep. It can look like just switching tasks so my brain is doing something different. Like just taking the freaking pressure off already can be like it doesn't have to look a certain way. I don't have to be like floating on a cloud of like lotus petals and instantly zen. Like, no, not so much. That's not realistic. So releasing that expectation is great. And hang on, I want to give a point about why the sleep stories work. I think it's just based on, my sort of neurological training that we do, particularly in therapeutic yoga. So there's a system. Okay, very thumbnail version. Neuroscientists, don't come back and tell me how wrong I am, because I'm going to do thumbnail version. Your nervous system, when you're doing something like flying a plane, is obviously very activated, right? You're in a heightened state of arousal. Every area of your brain is lit up. When we're sleeping, your parasympathetic nervous system is actually active. It's a different functionality of your nervous system that turns on. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that helps us rest and digest our food. And it's a state that you can train yourself to find, which we'll talk about later. However, listening to a sleep story is sort of like downshifting your brain. I grew up driving a stick shift car. Yes, I am dating myself, but it's literally like downshifting your brain. So you're taking it from that high level of sympathetic nervous system arousal lots of stimuli, lots of tasks to do. And you're giving it the next level down, which is listen to this sequential story, which has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And from there, your brain then, especially if you have positive associations with story time as a child, which I hope everyone has, but not everyone does. But if you have a positive association of a story time as a child being put to bed with a caregiver reading to you, then that also triggers memories of being safe, secure, which then releases dopamine in the brain, lowers cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and it elevates dopamine, which is that feel good, relaxing hormone. And then your nervous system shifts down even more towards that parasympathetic activation where your body starts to go, oh, I am safe. I am regulated. I'm not being asked to do those tasks. I'm focusing on this. And the neurochemistry of your brain then starts to take over. And even if you don't achieve sleep, you've at least downshifted your neurological system to produce chemicals and hormones that are conducive to resting and repairing your brain so that when you go back into sympathetic nervous system arousal, you've had literally a rest, even if it wasn't full sleep. So there's some science behind that. Anyway, that's my science nerd little moment there. So can I summarize your takeaways as I hear them?
Sure.
Tell me if I'm right or wrong. Okay.
All right.
I'm hearing that you have strategies ahead of time, even though you said, I don't prepare well, I'm not very good at this, blah, 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 blah. I would say you actually do have strategies ahead of time for how you help yourself rest on board. You have your binaural beats and you have your stories that I believe you're getting through the Calm app, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah. So people can find that Calm app if they like it. There's a lot on there. And I also hear you saying it building with rest in particular. So you have the endurance for the trip, that communication with your crew is like top priority. Communication with yourself. How am I doing? Then communicating that with the crew, and ongoing communication and being willing to revise that is key. Am I good so far?
Absolutely. Yeah. Being
Awesome.
self-aware is definitely key.
Yeah. I'm also hearing you say that endurance for the long haul, whether it's just a trip or a long career, is connecting your goals to kind of like, dare I say, a higher purpose is important. So like when you need rest on board, you're saying, think about the people that you're flying and the responsibility that you have, and connecting it to that makes it a little easier to switch. Because it's connected to a larger reason than just yourself and your own ego. And even advancing throughout your career, you have more endurance if you're thinking about bigger picture goals of like what you get back from the effort you put into it. And what else do I hear takeaways? I hear,
celebrate the small wins.
What's that?
Celebrate the small wins.
Celebrate the small wins. Yes. Celebrate the small, and whatever that looks like for you. And getting out of your comfort zone on a regular enough basis so that you start to recognize when maybe you're getting complacent and do things to challenge that comfort zone, because that kind of feeds you energy, which then gives you endurance then to keep on going in this career that you love, aviation. How did I do with your takeaways?
I think that fits. And, it's
Yay.
funny because we think that we as pilots are unique, and we think that, oh, well, these are challenges specifically to us. But I mean, when you say it like that, those are all things that make sense no matter what career you're in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe I can give some habits. I think we can kind of chat a little bit about habits that I've seen high performers have that give them endurance. Sound like a plan?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So, dear listeners, these habits that I'm going to share with you, I think I have 6 of them. Yes, I do. 6 of them. These come from a long career. So I started doing yoga when I was in high school as a means to advance my music performance, because I was already at school for the performing arts and it was already getting intense as a high schooler. So I started these habits. Most of them I started in high school and kept them throughout my career. And then any time in my life that I've come across a high performer, most of them music educators, yoga educators, some writers, some folks in business who I eventually taught, and healthcare providers. Whenever I've seen anybody who's at that like high level of like peak performance, but that also have their life together. Like they're not a hot mess. Otherwise, I've gone, hang on, can I buy you a cup of coffee and pick your brain? And I ask them questions about how have you done it? How have you built this life and endured in these often challenging careers and not sacrificed your health or your wellness? So this is collated from my own personal experience, from all of my training, and then from just all this informal interviewing I've been doing for years, because I'm maybe a little bit obsessed with this topic. So habits that are going to help you. I'm going to put a big frame before I give you habit number one, which is something John and I have been hinting towards, is sort of is like eliminating that pressure to be a certain way. So it's a mindset of moving towards balance or moving towards what you want, rather than like, I have to have this thing, or I have to be balanced, or I have to go in the fart locker and be asleep right away. It's just, what can we do to move towards that direction is more than enough. This eliminates that inherent like stress and self-punishment of feeling like you need something outside of yourself to make you happy. And I have found it's a really helpful way, and it seems to be a key mindset approach that most of the high performers I've interviewed and worked with talk about. They just move towards balance, move towards what they want. Okay, habit number one, be consistent and prioritize your self-care. Okay, if the word self-care makes you cringe, take a look at that. Take a long, hard look at that, because most of the people who cringe when I say self-care have an inherent limiting belief about it. They think it's for other people. They think it won't work for them. They've been told throughout their life that real men just suck it up. They've been told that it's lazy if you rest. There's some limiting belief in your mind that tells you that doing the simple things of caring for yourself is not worth it. However, we all know when you fly commercial aviation and you're in the back, and if the oxygen mask drops, you have to put on your own oxygen mask first before you can help anyone else. And we talk about this, but we don't prioritize it with our own physical and mental system. And I would like to propose a new standard operating procedure and a new checklist for all aviators, that the very first thing every day is your own self-care, your own sleep, your own movements, your own rest, your own food, whatever it is that you do that helps your physical and mental system thrive, that gets your top priority. For me, that means every single day, my to-do list, the top chunk of it is the stuff I'm doing for self-care. It's my meditation, my yoga, walking in nature, drinking enough water, blah, 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 blah. Being consistent with that every day is important. So my little anecdote for that is I asked a high performer who just retired from like a 20-year career in business, and then they taught for 30 years in the public schools to behavioral kids. They just retired from these careers. I said, how did you do it? How did you teach behavioral kids for all those years without losing your mind? Because most people quit after a year. And they said, every morning I would get up half an hour before I had to be up, and I would do meditation, breathing, and a little movement that helps my body. Every morning, I just made it what I did. And I was like, I wasn't expecting that. But that daily consistent work is what gave this person some longevity. So John, what do you think about prioritizing self-care and being consistent with that as a habit? Does that happen for you? Yay or nay?
I'd say it happens more now than it ever used to. I mean, it's cool. Any of this stuff is always an easier said than done sort of situation. Totally. But yeah, I mean, you find what works for you. It's as simple as, if you know that you fly better because you ate breakfast, then eat breakfast. If you so often you talk with executives that get up at 4 a.m, which is not something I will ever do. But they swear by it because it allows them the opportunity to, get a workout in the morning. These are those things that they have discovered help them operate at a high level. And that's different for everybody.
Yes. That is such a great point. It's different for everybody, because none of this comes from that everyone should get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do a meditation. No, you have to experiment and find what works for you. The key is to be consistent with prioritizing it. And that done over a long period of time can move mountains. It can really lead you to being a more stable and useful person. All right. So that's habit number one. Habit number two. Oh my gosh. This is one that I rebelled against for ages. It is tracking your metrics for self-care. We know as pilots that we track so much. We're tracking our fuel. We're using our checklists. We're tracking all of this information because we know that having real-time data helps us make better decisions. I rebelled against it, especially in the early parts of my career as a, crazy yogi musician teacher. It was like, don't put me in a box and make me do that stuff until I was forced to do it, staying at an ashram once for a month. And every morning we had sort of required practices we did. And they just had a log sheet outside the room. And we had to log every time we had to do 2 meditations a day and the hatha yoga practice and then our service work. We just had to check off if we did it or not. That's all. After a month of checking it all off, I looked back at all of those check marks and I could see where I was consistent, where the sticking points were, where I was falling off of what I wanted to do. And I could see really easy ways to shift things a little bit so that I could have more success. It was actually like asking myself to be accountable for doing what I want to do, which seems crazy. Like, why is it so hard for us to do the things that we want to do? But having that tracking of self-care is something that I haven't stopped doing. I have 5 things I track right now for my health that are relevant to me right now. I track my sleep, my movements, my water, my food intake, and then I have a daily practice that I'm doing for some mental training that I do every day. And I just write down every day what I want to do with it. Did I did it or didn't do it? At the end of the month, I tally up the percentage of my consistency and I look for ways to kind of move it towards where I want it to be. It's been a game changer for me. Have you ever done anything like that?
Yeah, there was a period where I did a gratitude journal.
No, sir.
I did.
Sir.
I did.
I love it. I did not think the words gratitude journal were going to happen in this episode.
I know. It's kind of weird. I did it for a while, and they had exactly what you're saying. Sort of, pick 3 things that you want to track for the course of the week, and it was kind of cool. I mean, I don't know how much I actually got out of it, but it definitely made you take a moment to think about what you're doing and what's important.
I think that's a key takeaway for this one, is not tracking what other people say you, again, should be tracking. This is so important, where a lot of people get hung up with self-care is they feel like they have to do what they feel like they should be doing or what some program or some plan or some teacher tells you should do. No. Pick the metrics that matter for you, and they might shift over time. It might be as simple as I need to track, I don't know, whatever. I'm a writer, so I spend a lot of time sitting. I need to track how many steps I'm taking a day. I don't do that. But again, it's got to be for the individual, and it's going to change over the course of your life as well. Cool. I love me some data now. I'm a data nerd now. It happened. So number 3 is making sure that you have passion and laughter. Okay, now this sounds so trite, but let me tell you what I'm saying here. If you find yourself every day waking up with dread and it feels like a heavy grind, not just because the work is hard and not because you're at a tough point in your career, because we all have those, but it feels like my student said, I feel like I'm dead inside. Those are tells that perhaps there's another avenue of aviation that you could explore. And you might be falling into that mind trap of, but I said I was going to do X, Y, and Z, so I have to do it. Instead of opening up the mind and saying, well, maybe there's something else I could be doing that is still in this field, but it's slightly different, that's actually going to bring that passion. Because there's no way you're going to have endurance for the long haul if you do not love what you're doing. And do not waste your one precious life doing things that you feel like you should be doing, because I think that makes you a less safe and competent aviator, because you're carrying that sort of weight of bleh into everything you're doing. And it can lead us to making bad decisions, quite honestly, because we're doing things with the wrong motivation.
Yeah. And it's easy to get stuck in that. I mean, I started out as an airline pilot thinking that's what I was going to do and what I was always wanted. And I got there and realized it was fun, but not really for me. And that was a hard choice because you work really, really hard for a long, long time to finally get to where you thought you wanted to be and realize, who am I now? And so, yeah, it's definitely important to, again, it goes back to being honest with yourself and understanding what it is that you want and understanding that sometimes what you want changes.
I think that was such a brave decision that you made. I'm going to stop and integrate this win for you because like that is a job that people work and work and work to have. And for you to get there and go, oh, okay, I think I need something different. That takes a huge like emotional, mental, physical, financial. It's a huge shift on all the levels. So I really applaud you for doing that. I hope that someone out there listening to this, wherever they're at in their career, if they're going, maybe it's not a referendum on my self-worth if I change my mind about what I want to do. That's actually a possibility. That's a real thing that you've modeled for people. So I applaud that. And I think there's a reason that we're here together because I did the same thing with being a classical performer. I got up on that stage and after like 5-10 years, I was like, yeah, no, this is not at all it. Now what? So I think that's really, really great modeling that you've done there. I included along with this habit with passion, I included laughter because man, lighten up. This isn't all about you. What do they say? The angels can fly because they take themselves so lightly. Laughter goes a long way towards sparking that passion. Okay. Habit number 4. I'm going to say this probably in every episode. Practice meditation or some type of contemplative practice. You might be a prayerful person. You might be a musician and you enjoy playing some music. You might paint or sculpt or flower arrange or do something else. But one of the biggest drains on our inner resources is stress. And one of the scientifically pedagogically proven ways to reduce stress is to have a regular meditation or contemplative practice where we actively sit quietly and invite whatever we are carrying around with us all the time to actually be seen, heard, and processed. So I'll give my quick anecdote for this. When you have a little baby and they're just a little infant, what are the 3 things they do? Or is it 2 things? They eat. Let me hear it, John. What else do babies do? They poop.
And
what else do they do? They scream. Oh, and they
because mine didn't sleep for 2 years.
Yes. So when we're babies, we do that, right? We like say we drink some mother's milk and then, it's rumbling around in the belly. And then we have all these, like, we feel it and the pressure is there. We cry, we scream. And then maybe we go, we fill the diaper like the pro baby that we are. We process through the emotion. Mom or dad cuddles us. And at some point we stop crying. This is a normal process that does not stop just because we grow these big, huge intellects. Like, I'm sorry, we're all still wired the same way the babies are. We just grow a bigger intellect around that baby impulse, which is to take information in, process it, have feelings and emotions about it, and then release it on through. This is part of what meditation actually does. Sitting quietly or contemplative practice like prayer or, playing relaxing music gives a time for all of that subconscious and unconscious stuff that we've been collecting all day long to rise to the surface, to be processed through, to just sort of be witnessed or observed, and then dissolve on its own. What happens when we don't have a regular practice of sort of taking out this garbage is it gets more and more built up inside of us, and more of our intellect and our discerning intelligence is used to push it away and ignore it and minimize it and explain it away and deny it. And everyone wants an aviator who has a clear mind, who is thinking without selfish motivation. Right? Don't you want that person flying you? That's who I want flying me when I go from Boston to Chicago to see my family. I want someone up there who is clear and who can make good decisions based on what's happening, not based on the noise that they're trying to ignore in their own head. So having this regular practice where you're letting everything you're carrying around sort of be digested and settled helps us make better choices in our daily life.
Yeah.
Have I made the case for meditation?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Habit number 5. Practice rest, relaxation, and sleep. These are really 3 different things that I think we don't train our children how to do this. And I teach yoga in a lot of public schools, and I teach kids how to do this. And the parents come back and they are thrilled that their kids know how to do this. And the kids end up teaching the parents. And then we have a lot healthier family systems. So I love to talk about this briefly. Sleep is sleep. We know what that is. You're out. You're like, what? Oh, I guess I fell asleep. 6 hours passed. Fabulous. Okay. What's the difference then between rest and relaxation? Rest can be considered in this little example as like an active thing you do, an active time that you have chosen to actively rest. So rest can look like something like, for me, laying on the couch, reading an uplifting book. Notice I said uplifting, so I want it to be restorative. It's not when I read my drama and trauma memoirs. Rest can be something like doing a guided relaxation. Can do a process like yoga nidra, which is called yogic sleep, which I can teach in a bonus episode. These moments when you allow your nervous system to shift towards that parasympathetic nervous system activation that I was talking about before, when you're not hyperstimulated, but you're also not totally asleep. But the body is in a state of quietude. It's not moving or moving very, very little. And the mind and the nervous system is shifting again towards that parasympathetic nervous system activation. So the breath rate will go down, the blood pressure will go down, the heart rate will go down, and some of the restorative processes of the nervous system and the neurochemicals will start to engage without you needing to tip all the way into sleep. Active rest like this, particularly guided relaxations, are great for people who don't like to nap. I know you said once, John, you're like, oh, I can't nap because then I wake up all groggy. Mm-hmm. So this type of sort of what I call active rest, I'm not talking about if you're a hardcore workout person, active rest for you might be taking a walk. I'm talking about like an active, restful nap or guided relaxation has been a key for me. I do one every single day. And it's a key why I think I have so much energy at 52 years old. And I feel like the Energizer Bunny a lot of the time, honestly, except when I'm really sick, which happens. So, and then relaxation is that category of activities you do, like hobbies. Like I'm a jigsaw puzzle nerd, stuff like that. Relaxation for you when you have it, you feel kind of like uplifted. You've allowed your mind and brain to kind of shift a little bit and it just feels good. You feel more energy at the end of it. It's all those hobby things that we do that sometimes go by the wayside when we are these busy, serious adults, Mm-hmm. So rest, relaxation, and sleep. Habit number 6. We're coming back to that gratitude. You said you kept a gratitude journal for a while, and I'm sure somebody out there rolled their eyes at that one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure, because I teach so many workshops. People go, oh, my God. Trust me, people, I'm not going to advocate for a gratitude journal, but I will say practicing gratitude is one of the things that I've consistently heard all of the high performers I've interviewed talk about, particularly the ones who are 60 or older. They said that this practice came into their consciousness, and when they started practicing it, they noticed a distinct shift in their ability to perform at their jobs. And I was like, really? Like, why is that? And one of them told me just the other day, it lessened the weight of the world. And then I wasn't carrying in that weight. I was able to see the people in front of me clearly. Mm-hmm. I didn't have to go out and try to grab everything outside of myself to prove who I am. I could just be present with what was happening. And I thought, how awesome for an aviator or like a new CFI who is looking to go to the airlines eventually. Instead of looking at this next, bang around the pattern for the 50th time in the day as like another tick towards the airlines, being like, I am so grateful I get to climb into an airplane and fly today. I'm so grateful I get to sit next to this knucklehead who doesn't know what he's doing. We're going to have some laughs. I'm so grateful. As soon as you start enunciating the things we can be grateful for, it brings this lightness and I think a clarity to thought. And there's actually been some studies done around research around employees that it was 66% of employees were willing to quit their jobs if they felt like they were not appreciated. And I was like, imagine that on the flight deck. If you're feeling unappreciated by your fellow crew members, you don't want them quitting during that intense crosswind landing or radio out moment. This has a profound impact, and it can sound very airy-fairy and like, oh, just write what you're grateful for. But when we actively take just a few minutes every day to list out what we're grateful for, it can start to shift the way we're looking at the world. And I think bring more clarity to the mind, which is always a good thing.
It all comes back to the general theme of the episode. Celebrate the small wins.
Celebrate the small wins. That builds endurance naturally, right? Because it just kind of creates this natural momentum that will sustain you through everything. Just do those things, everybody, and you'll be fine. Yeah. Easier said than done, right? Again, move towards, just move towards your balance, move towards doing little bits. One of my wisest teachers once said to me years and years ago, back when I was suffering and a way high achiever, people pleasing, perfectionist. He just looked at me. He said, do little things daily. And over time, you will be amazed at what you can do. And that's what I did. And here I am now to say that actually really works.
Good advice.
So I think we've done a good job of talking about endurance. Can I celebrate our win?
Yeah. And I appreciate the list and the sort of personal background information on that, because I mean, this takes us back to the entire point of the podcast. And it's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to have actionable steps and ideas of ways to improve whatever situation you're trying to improve. And hopefully, even if one out of those 6 things helps somebody, or just the stories in general help somebody, then we've put ourselves on track to make sure that what we're doing here gives people additional tools in their toolkit to be better.
Yes,
be calmer.
Absolutely. Just want to serve people by sharing what we've done, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and just to illuminate that conversation a little bit, because a rising tide carries all ships.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're calling that a wrap on this episode, are we?
I think so.
Awesome. We did well. I'm going to say that we did well. And please, if you're listening, remember to always drop us a line if you have comments, questions, concerns. You have your ideas for shows. We'd love to hear it. You can find us at, what's our website again, John?
calmcockpit.com.
I should have known that. You can also follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. Please leave us a review if you like, but really, we would just love to hear from you and keep this conversation going. So we will see you next time. And until then, fly smarter and
stress less.
Traffic holding across the runway 33 left, 3 clear.